Exactly 4 years ago today, when Vladimir Putin launched what he thought would be a days-long effort to seize the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, he was met with a staunch Ukrainian resistance and resilience that would endure throughout Russia's brutal, illegal, years-long assault. Through nightly attacks from Russian missiles, staggering losses of life on both sides, instability and lives upended for millions of Ukrainians, failed promises from Donald Trump to end the war, and still no peace deal or proof that Putin even wants peace. Today, President Volodymyr Zelensky is celebrating Ukraine's fight and the immense courage and endurance of its people. Quote, looking back at the beginning of the invasion and reflecting on today, we have every right to say we have defended our independence, we have not lost our statehood, Putin has not achieved his goals, he has not broken Ukrainians, he has not won this war. I want to bring in Atlantic staff writer Anne Applebaum. A new season of her podcast, Autocracy in America, is out right now. It is must-listen material. Also joining us, international affairs analyst Michael McFaul is here. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Russia. And with me at the table, Dr. Erwin Redlener, who co-founded the nonprofit Ukraine Children's Action Project in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and is the reason that this stays on our radar and that we have all assembled today. Ambassador McFaul, just talk first about that fact that 4 years in, even a leader as strong and steady and powerful and moral and courageous and charismatic as Zelensky has been disappointed in his own ability to sustain the world's focus and attention on this brutal war.
Well, I have two reactions. One, as an American, I'm embarrassed. I just was on a panel with 4 Ukrainians zooming in from Ukraine here at Stanford, and I'm embarrassed to be on a platform with Ukrainians fighting for their freedom, and we abandoned them. We used to give them military assistance and economic assistance. President Trump has decided that it's not in America's interest to do so, and he did that without getting anything from the Russians in return. So my first emotional reaction is embarrassment as an American. Second, the Europeans have stepped up, so let's acknowledge that. They have not abandoned Ukraine, and we should acknowledge that. But the third thing I would say on this tragic, just horrific day, the beginning of the 5th year of this war, who ever thought we'd be talking about this, Nicolle, today? But President Zelensky's right. Putin told us what his war objectives were, and he's failed at all of them. He sought to conquer all of Ukraine. He sent his tanks to Kyiv, not Donetsk. Ukraine is an independent country today. Second, he wanted to denazify, in his language, Ukraine, that is to overthrow Zelensky and the parliament. Zelensky is still president of Ukraine today. Third, he wanted to demilitarize Ukraine. It's the most militarized it's ever been. And fourth, he allegedly wanted to stop NATO. NATO now has 2 more powerful countries in the alliance, Sweden and Finland, and the relationship between NATO and Ukraine is deeper than ever before. So on all of his objectives, at incredible cost, 1.3 million casualties, Putin hasn't achieved any of his primary objectives.
And Applebaum, this point about strengthening NATO, I don't know that anyone would have opted into the poli-sci experiment of taking America off the side of the good guys and the democracies on the planet. But if they wanted to, could you have even predicted that Europe would have stepped up the way it has?
Many people didn't think it was possible, and they didn't think it was going to happen. I think Europe has really changed, both over the last 4 years of the war and even over the last year of the Trump presidency. I think the understanding that Russia was a direct threat, not just to Ukraine, but to all Europeans, that it was using sabotage, cyber warfare, other kinds of hybrid attacks, political influence campaigns to try to shape and undermine European democracies. I think that realization has now sunk in, and most current European leaders understand that and know it. And I also think that the Trump administration's contradictory language and actions over the last year have also convinced Europeans both that they should stand by Ukraine and also that they need to think differently about their own defense and even their own economic relationship with the United States. You know, they've been told pretty clearly by a range of American officials, some nicely, some less nicely, that the United States is not interested in providing defenses to Europe in the way that it was. Maybe there's still a nuclear umbrella, maybe not. The implication is sometimes different depending on who's talking. And they're also seeing the United States backing and supporting far-right and other European movements who are pro-Russian and who oppose European unity and European defense spending. So they're hearing this contradictory, uncertain message from the United States, and that has made them feel that we need to rely on our own firepower. We need to work much more closely with Ukraine. We need to understand what the Ukrainians are doing. The Ukrainians have really reinvented warfare over the last 4 years. They now have the most sophisticated army in the world at drone warfare. They've recreated, or not recreated, they created from scratch a drone industry that didn't exist before. Europeans are interested in being part of that, tapping into it, and eventually integrating Ukraine's military knowledge and expertise into their own. So yeah, we've seen I think that's maybe, aside from the changes inside Ukraine, which are momentous and spectacular, I think the change inside Europe over the last several years is also pretty remarkable.
I mean, Ambassador McFaul and Anne Applebaum are getting at the tectonic shifts in Europe and in America. You've been so brilliant and focused on keeping us focused on the children and reminding everyone that 4 years is an eternity in the life of a child.
You know, Nicolle, we've seen a lot of children who have never been to a regular school, and they're 9, 10 years old now. And it's devastating. The Ukrainians are definitely, we call them resilient. They're resolute, they're brave, they're innovative, they're all of that. But this is exhausting. And, and the other thing I should point out, this may be called a war on the front lines in the east and south of Ukraine. But what's happening in the rest of Ukraine is a series of war crimes, just unabashed, unadulterated attacks on civilian infrastructure, making this the worst winter in modern memory in Ukraine, of course, without electricity for most of the day in many places, without heat. It's a nightmare. We have kids going to school when they go to school in shelters, and a lot of times not going to school. The average school-age child in Ukraine has spent about 4,000 hours in shelters studying. I mean, it's just absolutely extraordinary. And I'm telling you, they're putting up with this, and they didn't need to. And as Ambassador said, and as Anne said, the United States should have been there with them. Why? Because Ukraine is on our front line, defending our democracy, defending Europe's democracy, and they're doing a hell of a job at it. But here we are, like, we've kind of abandoned them in some kind of a weird America First philosophy that is not even relevant.
As Trump embarks on many foreign adventures. I have to sneak in a break. I'm going to ask all of you to stick around. We'll all be right back on the other side. We're all back. Ambassador McFaul, let me read what you wrote on Substack today. Quote, decades from now, when historians write a full accounting of this war, serious analytical books, or however we will consume knowledge then, will describe how Ukraine defeated Russia. I'm confident in that prediction because Putin has already failed to achieve any of his initial war aims and has very few options to reverse these outcomes, even if he decides to fight on for years. How and when does it end, in your view? What will they be analyzing?
I don't know, Nicolle. I wish I had an answer for that. Tragically, I predict it's going to go for a long time still because Putin thinks time's on our side. He thinks he has the Trump administration in his pocket, and therefore he's going to keep fighting to try to conquer all of Donbass, and that could take years and maybe never happen. The Ukrainians are having successes as well. But I just want to say, we were talking about abandoning Ukraine. You haven't abandoned Ukraine. I want to thank you for that and how much time you have given to this horrible war over the last 4 years. And know that millions of Americans also haven't abandoned Ukraine. President Trump does not speak for all of us. Yes, he's the president of the United States, but he is out of touch with American society. I just had 6 meetings with various Ukrainian organizations and companies here in the Silicon Silicon Valley because they understand what Anne was talking about. If you want to reinvest in American defense, you better have partnerships with Ukrainians. And so the long haul, I'm optimistic. I hope that we can reverse this terrible policy that the Trump administration has. And in the long run, I know that Ukraine will win and Russia, Putin's Russia, will lose.
I mean, Anne, this is the funny thing about this country's posture on Ukraine. The American people, including large swaths of Trump's own political coalition, although that is a shrinking coalition, so I don't know if this is still true, support Ukraine. I mean, large swaths of formerly normal Republicans, now MAGA subservient members of Congress, I don't know that they adhere to policy anymore, they also supported Ukraine. I mean, what is the sort of perception in Ukraine and in Europe of where America even stands on the war?
So it looks to Europeans and Ukrainians, although they're mostly wouldn't say it in public, and of course to many Americans, as if Trump has effectively privatized American foreign policy. That the purpose of America's negotiations with Russia is to benefit private American companies. They're clearly doing business deals with Russia. We know that. Steve Witkoff has said it. He said it in public. He said it in private. We know these negotiations are going on. We don't really know who benefits. Maybe it's his family or Trump's family. Maybe it's just friends of theirs or companies who are their donors or their associates. That seems to be the purpose of the policy in Ukraine. It's not to stop the war. It's not to accept that it would be convenient for them if the war ended, because then they could get on with business. But it's certainly not to help Ukrainians. It's not to build democracy. It's not to make Europe safe. It's to make profits for some U.S. companies whose names we don't yet know.
Quick last word.
Yeah, we need to do something. We need to understand why the United States of America, given what Anne just said, is responsible for negotiating a peace. It should be Europe. It's in Europe's interest to solve this and solve it fast, Nicolle. And I think we cannot forget what's happening to Ukraine's children. At the end of the day, this is a massive humanitarian crisis, and thanks for exposing it again.
Thank you for keeping this on our radar. There were many, many, many emails and calls to make sure that this day didn't go unnoticed and uncovered. I thank you, Anne, and Ambassador, for being here as well. You can visit ucap.help for more information on how to help Ukraine's kids. When we come back, Robert De Niro gets emotional talking about his love for our country and what his anger over what Donald Trump is doing to it means for all of us. I'll show you that moment from this week's episode of The Best People after a very short break.